And good evening, everyone. I am not Rochelle Herman. I'm Doug Miles, sitting in for Rochelle today. She's taking a bit of a vacation. I believe she went up to her hometown up in the Massachusetts area. So I'd like to thank her for this opportunity to be hosting the program tonight, which is It's All About Health, the television version. My name is Doug Miles. I host a daily talk show over at WIBQ, 1220 on your AM dial, 10 to noon every day, so I hope you make it a point to join us. And I had the opportunity to host the show, and I wanted to invite my friend Gary Schuster on. He joins us every Friday on the program, and Gary has a wide career in the media, Detroit News. He was the editor there and worked for CBS News, both in television and radio. So we're just going to kind of kick it around tonight and talk a little bit about Gary's career, which we do on the Friday show. So thanks for joining us tonight. We'll have some fun. And Gary, thanks for coming down.
Very great to be with you. It's another medium, but one we both know, so it's good to be.
You have more experience than I do in television.
Well, a little bit, yeah. But it's good to be back.
Really is, yeah. Gary joins us on the Friday edition of the show, and you've been working. Let's start with the radio, not the radio, the newspaper business. You started out in the Detroit area.
Yeah, I started out in the Detroit area, right. I started out as a copy boy there, and started back in 1959, and sort of dating myself. But nonetheless, it was that. Yeah, I was the child labor laws were violated, but yeah, I started there and then worked my way up. Got through school at Wayne State University, and then started reporting, and it was so funny. I worked at the news for about 9 years until I got my degree. Then they wouldn't hire me as a reporter because I had no experience.
No.
So I had to go out to a small suburban paper in Detroit. I worked there for 2, and then the news called me back and said, come on back. So I went there, went up to Lansing, worked the State Capitol Bureau there, was the bureau chief up there, and then went back downtown and worked as 2 years, through almost 3 years, as the city editor and news editor, running the whole paper except for the women's department, society pages.
Is that something you always wanted to do, though, as a kid? Were you kind of a news hound, followed it?
No, I sort of stumbled into it. I worked on the paper at high school, but I liked it, but I never understood that's what I wanted. I tried about 12 other things in college. I ended up as a psych major, and then a journalism major after that, but I was in pre-med, I was in business, I was in education, everything but health.
Actually, that's probably the best training for a journalist. You've done a little bit of everything, and then you go into that, right?
When they said I got a liberal arts degree, I really got a liberal arts degree. I mean, I was in every facet of education, really. And I even studied criminology for a while on a master's degree level. And so I had enough and I went to law school for a year at Wayne. So by the time I finished all that, I had sort of been in a lot of nooks and crannies that really helped me as a reporter.
Criminology helping with your covering the politicians, I imagine.
Yeah, well, I suppose. I started out in the police beat, though, and we had on the show here a couple of weeks ago a friend of mine who's still a reporter in Detroit who is still doing, investigative stuff. And
covered the Hoffa case.
Covered the Hoffa disappearance, and I was directing the news coverage of that. But, I mean, all those kind of things, you just never know when you're going to have to reach in and where it's going to come from in your background on something that applies to something that you were working on. So anyway, I did that for a while, and then the paper sent me down to Washington as the bureau chief in Washington in '78, and I started covering Carter, and then picked up Reagan in '80 as a candidate. We were going to cover, because the convention was going to be in Detroit in 1980, the Republican convention. And the paper wanted somebody with every candidate. And if you remember that year, there were, 12 Republican candidates. I mean, everybody from Lyndon LaRouche to Howard Baker. I mean, it was just, the field was loaded.
That was the year where Reagan got up in New Hampshire and said, I am paying for this microphone,
Mr. Breen, and the guy's name was Green. He was, I was standing right next to him. I was standing right next to him, yeah.
Great year for covering any kind of candidate.
It was so funny. Reagan, about 3 nights later after that, and he was on a roll. He came out of that debate pretty well because of taking that strong stand. We were at some other hall, and he was sitting next to this. He got there early, and all these signs are up: Reagan, Bush, Baker, Dole. All these guys are running. Reagan gets in there. He was the second guy up on the podium. And he's sitting next to this fellow. He happened to be sitting next to this one other guy, and he looked at the guy, and he says, I see all these things. He says, who's LaRouche? This guy says, I'm LaRouche. It was Lyndon LaRouche sitting next to him. He didn't have any idea who he was, but it was sort of a funny thing. And he, obviously came out of that and did well in South Carolina and then moved on through. But so when he won, I went to the White House and stayed at the White House and started covering his administration. and did a lot of things with him. Covered the '84 campaign as well. Went to Russia with her. Went to Geneva with him to meet Gorbachev in that first meeting, and went to China with him, and just a lot of travel, a lot of interaction.
Both as a newspaper man, then later in
well, yes, as
CBS,
a newspaper man right until '85, and then I left. CBS came and said, how about joining us? And so I went to CBS and did that, for another 2 years. Yeah.
So the political.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, because I covered the state capitol. That's politics, sort of, 102. 101 is the city council meetings. And I had to cover 3 or 4 of those every Monday night when I was in the Detroit suburbs. So you sort of get baptized at that level.
Yeah.
And you realize as you go through, I mean, I had a guy who was the mayor of Oak Park, who ended up going up to the state capitol and becoming a state representative, and then became a congressman. I mean, I followed him all the way. I had a guy who was my history teacher in high school, who was studying to be a priest, who's still a congressman. He left the priesthood, went to the state, ran for state office, was a state rep, then a state senator, now a congressman. Dale Kildee from Flint, and he's still there. I knew this guy since I was 14. So politics sort of became part. I became part of politics, and politics became part of me, just because these guys moved through the ranks, and I did too.
And all politics, like they say, is local. So you start the local and you move your way up.
Yeah, and it was advantageous.
It's fascinating to cover, though, isn't it? I mean, even on the lower level.
Yeah, oh no, it's more fun on the lower level, actually, because they get stuff done. You can get a new fire hydrant put in, on a corner.
Sure.
A lot easier. You can get, Medicaid through.
Right.
So I mean, it's you can see it work better on the local level, and it's more fun because it's really, sort of cutthroat, a lot more cutthroat than it is. They're gentlemen, the Senate floor. The gentleman, I yield to the gentleman from West Virginia. You don't hear that in the city commission.
No.
You bomb my units. That's great.
We can talk a little bit later on in the second half of the show about more of the CBS and what you did there. But let's talk about the newspaper work that you did with the Detroit News. Detroit, a great city for so many things. I mean, you talk politics, sports, things that are going on. Not always great stories to cover. I mean, you've had your share of.
Always great stories.
I mean, not always pleasant stories.
Not always pleasant, but that's not the business.
What kind of city was it just to work in?
Well, Detroit's sort of a lunch bucket town. I mean, it's blue collar, big auto plants when I was there. Basically heavily Democratic in the city. When I was there, we had a lot of, well, first of all, there were 3 newspapers. When I first started, there was the Detroit Times, which was owned by Hearst. So you had a yellow rag in there, doing a lot of sensational stuff. Then you had the Free Press, which was owned by Knight Ridder, which just sold all those papers. And then the Detroit News, which was a family-owned paper, went back to the Scripps Howard family that grew out of Ohio. And so you had a lot of competition. It was a big labor town, so you had a heavy labor beat. Because of that, you had heavy politics. Wasn't a whole lot of society. There was some, but not a lot. You had great sports because you had pro football, pro hockey, pro basketball, finally after the Pistons left Fort Wayne and came to Detroit. And you had baseball. And all those sports are still there. Now, not all of them are in the city. 3 of them are still downtown.
Brought the Lions back, actually.
Brought the Lions back downtown from the suburbs. The Pistons are still out in Auburn Heights, Auburn Hills, but the other 3 are downtown. And they fill that place up. They fill it up.
You were there, obviously, during the tough times with the auto industry. Lee Iacocca having to come in with Chrysler and all that.
Save it. I was in Washington then, and when they did the Chrysler bailout, as they called it.
Right.
Jamie Blanchard, who was a congressman whose district happened to include the Highland Park facilities for Chrysler, went to grade school with me.
Oh, really?
He was a year behind me in grade school. Ended up he was congressman, then he became the governor. And then he was ambassador to Canada. But he and I grew up together. He used to come by my mom's house on Memorial Day parade day when he was governor and sit on the front porch with us before he had to go down and get in the car to ride through town.
Wow.
And this was only 15 years ago or something like that. So it's it's who you knew, and I knew a lot of those folks around. And so Blanchard helped Iacocca get that bailout, which really helped him, his political career in Michigan.